Yeah. So just Our Ladies, we are a worldwide organization specifically committed to promoting gender diversity in the art community through meetups, mentorship, in a friendly and safe environment. We're the Philly chapter. And if you want to learn more about a code of content, you could go to ourladies.org, code of conduct. There's a few events we have coming up. So we have a Tidy Tuesday event this November 14th, next week, a week from today. Oh, that's not right. Sure why it's showing that. Ignore analyzing experiments with casual forests. We actually have an event in, what was it, December? Alice, can you help me out?
December
December.
7th.
Thank you. Um, the advent of code. So there'll be a daily puzzle for different coding exercises, and we'll just kick that off and kind of do a couple examples together, go through that process. And then on November 18th, Barcamp 14 in-person event is happening. I've heard really good things about that one. I got my ticket to go, so highly recommend checking that one out too. We have a few ways that you can get involved if you want to participate more. So one is joining our Slack community. Links are in that document. We have a lot of channels in there to get help with our stuff, to find out about events, just connect with other people. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel to find out about to see some of our previous events, volunteer as a speaker at another event, as a mentor, or even an organizer. So we are looking for new organizers to join the team. We just welcomed our newest organizer a couple days ago. Welcome, Darian. We will get to know her more as we do some future events. And again, thanks to our sponsors, our consortium, our O'Reilly and Independence Media. And welcome most of all to Tanya Shapiro. So Tanya is joining from St. Petersburg, Florida. If you don't already follow her on Twitter, I highly recommend following her on Twitter. She has amazing data visualizations and she has done some interactive ones, which I am really excited to learn more about using Observable. She is an independent data consultant working a lot in data visualizations in particular. And when she's not doing awesome data viz, you can find her cycling or exploring downtown St. Petersburg. I'll hand it over to you, Tanya, to introduce yourself and start the show.
I'm so pumped and I'm so excited that all of you could be here today. Jesse, thanks for the warm intro. I'm so excited to partner up with Our Ladies Philly for this. Before I start sharing my screen, I'm just going to send out in the chat a link to the GitHub repo. That's going to contain all of the materials, including slides, links to the notebook, and a few extra treats in there as well. Let me just send that in the chat. And if you run into any issues, you've got the Our Ladies Philly team that's ready to troubleshoot in the chat anytime. So feel free to ask questions as you're going through. Cool. All right, let's rock and roll. Oh, first things first, I'm going to share my screen as soon as I can get. Hold on just a moment. Sorry about that. Trying to actually blow up my screen real quick. Okay. All right. So wherever you're tuning in from today, I'm super excited that you're here with me. I saw some folks making it all the way from Europe. I know it's got to be like midnight your time. So wherever you are, good evening, good morning. I'm just excited to be doing Observable Plot with y'all today. Slides will be really quick. I want to dive right into Observable Notebooks, but before we get into it, I figured I would do just a quick intro and kind of highlight what we're setting ourselves up for today. So as Jesse already mentioned, I'm an independent data consultant. I'm here in the Tampa Bay St. Pete area. So if you find yourself in the neighborhood, please give me a shout. I'd love nothing more than to meet up in person with my fellow data geeks. If we've crossed paths in the past before, it's most likely ggplot related. I was smitten with the ggplot community all the way back to the Tidy Tuesday days. I'm not as active as I'd love to be today, but I really found and met some inspiring individuals through that community. And in my prior life, I used to work in the insurance industry. So I wanted to share a little bit about my data viz learning journey. And I consider myself a forever student. I'm constantly looking online at what's going on. I'm trying to learn new things as I'm going, and I try to share as I'm going through that journey. And last year, I really became focused on trying to learn how to build interactive data visualizations. And keep in mind, my starting point was creating data visuals with R and ggplot. And I found other libraries to create interactive data viz in R. There's a lot of wonderful ones out there like HighCharter, Leaflet R. But at the end of the day, I kept realizing that there was no way to get away from JavaScript. All of these libraries at the end of the day are just JavaScript wrappers that make it easy for our users to use. So eventually at some point you hit a wall where you want to do something really custom, you'll probably have to learn JavaScript. And I was like, okay, I'm going to bite the bullet. I'm going to go look at what learning materials are out there online because I really want to start getting involved in building interactive data viz. And of course, I was inundated with a bunch of stuff. I needed to set up Node.js. I was learning stuff about D3, which, by the way, seemed really intimidating off the bat. I had no clue what SVG was. I had no idea which IDE to set up. And like most things, when I find myself overwhelmed, I tend to put this permanent bookmark. And I'm like, well, I'll get to this later when I have time. And I shut that book for about 2 months. And then eventually I crossed paths with one of my data viz heroes, Allison Horst, and we had a conversation about learning JavaScript, and she found herself navigating JavaScript data viz as well. And she turned me on to observable notebooks. And observable notebooks started becoming my new playground for interactive data visualization. So if you're coming from like a Python background or you've used Jupyter notebooks, the concept is pretty much the same, where you could start creating code blocks, coding, and then rendering your code immediately in a notebook. My favorite part was I didn't have to mess with any kind of installation. So I didn't have to go figure out like how to install Node.js, figure out a new IDE. I could immediately start coding without getting frustrated about all of the prerequisites before getting to the coding part. The other thing that I really enjoyed about coding in observable notebooks is getting to work with Observable Plot. And for me, it felt pretty familiar. And I'm going to get into why it felt pretty familiar because this was news to me. And lastly, maybe one of my most favorite things is that Observable Plot was really easy to integrate with my Quarto site. So I recently published a Quarto site and wanted to show off some interactive tricks. And it was really nice that you could use OJS blocks to render Observable Plot directly in your Quarto HTML pages. By the way, I love Aubrey Plaza. I feel like she's got the same reaction for everything. So this is definitely her looking very excited about it. So trust me, she's more excited about observable notebooks than she's letting on. Quick little intro about Observable Plot. So Observable Plot is a free and open source JavaScript library. It comes from the same mastermind genius who created D3. So if you look under the hood at how Observable Plot is created, it's actually using D3 to build all of the marks. And the reason that it felt so familiar and intuitive to me, I found out it was actually inspired by the grammar of graphics. So for any kind of ggplot fan on here, when we're going through it, hopefully it feels familiar to you too and how it's set up. And the familiarity really comes with the idea that you can start layering marks. When I say marks, if you're coming from a ggplot background, think of geoms, where we can start building very unique plots. And my favorite thing is that we get to make it dynamic by plugging in some inputs. So, you know, if you're coming from like an app dev perspective, I guess Shiny, it's very input output. Is a similar concept in Observable Plot that we'll be looking into today. Here's an example of it in action. This is a popular data set to use with stock closing prices. So here I've got an input and I've got different stock tickers here for some big tech companies. And if I change it, you'll see that the plot is changing real time right here. And PS, yes, this presentation was created with Quarto Reveal.js. So this is like another kind of incepted example of how you could start building Observable Plot, but we'll get to that towards the end of this workshop. Goals for today, no stress. I don't want you stressing about coding. This is going to be a nice, simple walkthrough. We're going to be going through an observable notebook that I've put together. We're going to learn about how to build observable plots, how to use that in tandem with inputs to create dynamic observable plots, And then we'll close out with looking at an actual example of how you can use Observable with Quarto to create something unique. So without further ado, let's hop right into the Observable notebook. I've got T Swift here to open us up. As if you haven't guessed it already, we're going to be working with Taylor Swift songs today. So this is actually coming from a Tidy Tuesday repo from I think 2 weeks ago. Don't count me on that. I've got no perception of time. If you're not a Swiftie, don't worry. I still have love in my heart for you. But I think the data set is still pretty cool because it's dealing with Spotify audio features, which will let us do a lot of different things. So a couple notes about Observable Plot, Observable Notebooks. It's really easy to sign up. You can create a free account. Once you've created a free account, if you want to save this notebook and play around with it later, you can actually fork it and then create a copy of it and do other things with it. You can come back and refer to it as a cookbook. There's a lot of things to cover today. So I've also added additional resources that I found helpful in my learning journey. So if you want to embark on this learning journey with me, hopefully some of this stuff will help you out as well. And that includes a Slack channel. So Observable has its own Slack channel that makes it easy to reach out to people to help troubleshoot questions. I've got some links to some docs, some really cool blog posts, some example notebooks, and even some YouTube content. So feel free to dig into that as you please after the workshop. Other note before we get into the data, and this was new to me coming from an R background, is understanding that these notebooks don't run sequentially. So if you're used to reading things top down in R, right? If you're writing a variable in one place and then trying to do something somewhere else and it's not sequential, it's going to throw errors at you. In observable notebooks, you could technically have a variable all the way at the bottom of your notebook, and then you could call that variable somewhere in the middle and it would still work. So it took me some getting used to. So if you're not familiar with reactive programming, just like a quick aside, because this notebook is not perfectly written top down. In fact, I've got the data towards the bottom. So we're going to scroll down to see how that looks like. Okay. All right. By the way, if you have any issues and you're just logging on, feel free to use the chat. We have the wonderful R Ladies group that will help you troubleshoot. And I'm sure one of them will come off of mute if something horribly goes wrong and nobody can see my screen. So I'm assuming everyone can see my screen at this point. All right.
We can.
So
yeah.
First things first. Oh, cool. Awesome. I love it. I can't see thumbs up. I don't have my chat open, so I love the verbal confirmation. So first things first, before we get into any visualization, it's always dealing with, well, how do I bring in data into my environment? And then of course, there's going to be a little bit of wrangling. I've never taught a data viz workshop where there's not a bit of data wrangling, whether it's ggplot and dplyr, whether it's this in JavaScript, there's always a little bit of data munching before we get to the fun part. So please bear with me. Don't feel overwhelmed. There's links to everything. And this is just meant to be a really cool, easy breezy way of going through the data together. So in Observable, the first thing to know about notebooks is that you can create different cell blocks or code chunks. And these code chunks can either be JavaScript or text, which uses Markdown. And then you'll notice there's also a SQL option, which we'll get to in just a moment. So all of the text is right now rendered with this text output. And then I have here also JavaScript. You'll also notice that there's some cool pop-up things that will like pre-render charts for you, which you're always welcome to use as a good starting point. I use them a lot as well. The first thing we're going to do is connect to data. You can hook this up to a database, but if you're like me, most of your data might be coming in CSV files too. You could say upload data, and then you could go to, let me see here, data. I could technically load this big text stock prices, and you'll notice it automatically renders this table output. Cool fun fact about observable notebooks, they have their own DuckDB client, which makes it really easy to preview data, kind of like a SQL table. So you'll see the data preview with what type of variables are in there, what kind of data types you have. So I've got string data types, number data types. And I can scroll through this and sort it and kind of see the distribution for some numeric variables. Really cool way to preview data. So I'm going to get rid of this for now. Let's talk high level about this Taylor Swift song data set. So in this data set, each record represents a song within a specific album. And then if you scroll to the side, you're going to see some numeric variables that include danceability, energy, loudness. And if you're not familiar with Spotify's API and what they do behind the scenes, I don't know how they come up with these metrics, but it's pretty cool. I don't know how to measure if a song is danceable, but somebody at Spotify is really good at measuring that. So they've created their own scale. Most of them are scaled 0 to 1. So it tells us a lot about the different features of that song. So if it's danceable, believe like how happy it is, the valence, the acousticness, the speechiness, instrumentalness, etc. So a lot of cool variables for us to play with today. I've also imported a second CSV file. This is just in longer format, and we'll get into why we're using a pivoted data set when we get to the plotting thing. But all you need to know for now is that you can simply upload your CSV files using their UI, and you can preview the files directly in the notebook. There's going to be a little bit of data wrangling, but I'm not, for the purpose of this workshop, since we're going for breadth over depth, I'm not going to go too extensively into wrangling with JavaScript and arrow functions and map and arrays. I do highly recommend, though, Alison Horst has a great course on data wrangling with JavaScript. I have links here. I also have links in the additional resources above. But here's some examples of using that JavaScript code chunk to start creating JavaScript variables. So here I've got a list variable of features that I've set up. We'll use this later on for input values. I also create another list of all of Taylor Swift's albums instead of hard coding them in. I have another array of features because in JavaScript, what you're essentially dealing with, instead of dealing with like CSV files, you're dealing with arrays with different objects within those arrays. So if you like peel this down, you'll see this is a list. I believe somewhere we're going to go get into an array. Oh, here it is. So this, for instance, is your data frame array. So you've got an array, you've got an object, and each object has different variables within that. So here we see we've got track name, album name, all of the things that we previewed before in that nice DuckDB table. Other thing that I like about Observable is the data wrangling doesn't always have to be done in JavaScript. So if you are new to JavaScript like me, and you're very familiar with SQL, it's nice that you have that option to actually write SQL queries within your Observable notebook. And I'll show you exactly how you can do that. So here in this code chunk, you can start by creating a SQL code chunk. You're going to select a data source. These data sources include all of the arrays that you've already imported. So like your CSV files. I had my CSV file, I believe I called it songs. The other important thing to know is like you can label your cells and then call them later for certain things. So if I want to create a new data frame and call this like a subset of songs, I can start building my queries. So select all from subset, sorry, not subset songs. You'll see it pops back the results. We won't dive into SQL today. There's so much more you can cover with SQL. Paul, who's part of the Observable team as well, has a great intro to SQL course where he's running SQL queries directly in Observable notebooks. Definitely recommend checking that out if you're newer to SQL and have interest in learning. The cooler thing about writing SQL queries on an Observable, and this really blew my mind, is the ability to use JavaScript variables within your SQL queries. So for instance, if I want to start subsetting and filtering data, I can do that with SQL, where I am now passing in a variable with this $ in brackets. This sliders.valence is representing an input variable that we'll talk about upwards in the notebook. But all I want you to take away from this is that, one, yes, you can write SQL queries. These SQL queries can run directly off of your CSV files that you import. And the other cool thing is that you can start filtering and subsetting data based on dynamic inputs that you've created in your notebook. Another cool thing for beginners, you can import functions from other notebooks. Beginning for me is a lot of copy pasta. I go on repositories, I go see what other people are doing, I copy a function, I play with it, I try to do something with it. Here in Observable Notebooks, instead of going and then manually copying the code from someone else, so let me try to open this up in a different browser. This is Phil's notebook with correlation heat map. Phil has some useful functions that I don't feel like writing myself, which deal with correlation values. Phil's done all the math for us. So if I want to now use this correlation function, what I can do instead of copy and pasting this into a JavaScript code block, what I can do is use this import function. And what I'm saying is import the correlation function from that notebook, and then I'm pointing it to the actual URL from that notebook. So it's the trailing URL from the URL itself here.
We have a question. I think you kind of answering it, but can we also integrate our code inside of observable tables or notebooks?
With our code, I don't believe so at the moment, but we will be covering Quarto. And in Quarto, we're going to see some interaction between R and OJS. So if you're looking for more of a cross for those two languages, I definitely recommend looking at the Quarto route. You could also technically run Observable Plot in any other IDE, like if you're using Visual Studio, you could use it there, and then maybe use like WebR, I guess. But I have not touched WebR, so I'm not the authority to speak to that at all. Good question. Good question. So importing functions, you can do it from other notebooks instead of copy pasting. And you can also set up your own functions here. So here are some examples of creating functions, but I do not want you worrying about creating functions. This is only for the benefit of the data viz later on. All I want is to show that, this is the entire data setup that we're working with before getting into Observable Plot. Last but not least, if you're really super into web dev and want to do some custom styling tricks and you know a little bit of CSS, you can also plug in HTML into your text cell. So this is a text block, and all I'm doing is using style and using some CSS to customize this notebook. All right, now for the fun part, building plots with Observable Plot. So off the bat, I want us to take a look, and be a good starting point is just trying to use this add cell function. And what I like is that when you click on a specific chart type, so let's say bar charts are, I guess, the most popular ones that I always use as a reference point. It'll auto-populate an example of plot with marks and a toy data set. So this toy data set that they're using is Alphabet. And when you click render, you can see it already renders the bar plot. So if you don't know what a good starting point is and you have a specific graph in mind, that's a really neat feature to leverage within Observable Plot.
There's another.
Let's get, yep, go ahead.
So back to the links. Will the links to functions from other notebooks always be valid? And what if the user decides to delete the source notebook?
Good question. I can find out for you. I get hesitant about those things as well. So for instance, like with web dev, sometimes I prefer coding it in there, but I always like giving the attribution as well. At least with importing, it's a nice, clear way to give attribution to other users who are creating those functions. But good question. I will get back to you on that. So getting set up with plot. So the first thing that we start off with is going to be plot. So you're calling the library plot, and then you're doing .plot to start setting up Observable Plot. All of this stuff at the very beginning, if you're familiar with like ggplot, I would kind of call this like the stuff that you would set up in ggplot themes. And this gets set up as like all these different mappings, like margin left, height, width. These are things that can help you adjust the plot dimensions. You've got stuff to help with labels. I think this was actually on a recent release where they've added in now different mappings for title, subtitle, and captions. You can do some additional stylings. Oh, by the way, can someone give me a thumbs up if you can hear me? Because I feel like my audio, my AirPods are dying out. So I just want to make sure that I've not lost you. Oh, cool. I'm getting thumbs up. Sweet. You have items here to modify and customize your Y and X axis, stuff to customize your legends. And then this is the meat and potatoes that I really want to get into for this first example, which is marks. So marks, going back to that ggplot comparison, think of marks like geoms if you're coming from that art background. What you can do with marks is you can start layering things on top of each other. So here, this plot.cell mark is creating a heat map tile effect. And then I've coupled it with another mark called plot.text, where I'm overlaying the actual text annotation for those correlations. So this, I tried to go for more traditional plots on this call. I know some people know me for more abstract plots, but I think this might have more of a data science-y application. So this is a basic correlation matrix. And what we're doing here is comparing features, audio features. So like acousticness against danceability, they're positively or negatively correlated. So the plot.cell is creating all of these different squares here. It's creating the tiling effect. Like ggplot, I'm going to be referencing ggplot a lot. Trust me, ggplot and I are still good. I can still love ggplot and observable plot. So don't ask me to choose. I just couldn't do that right now. But I'm going to use that as a reference point a lot on this call. So please bear with me. So similar to aesthetics with ggplot, where you're mapping variables to different columns in your data set, with plot, they refer to it as binding the data to a variable. So here we are binding X to a variable called A within the data set. And then similarly with Y, we're binding it to the B variable. Here we have the fill that's set to the correlation value. So in theory, what you could do, if you have like a static mapping, you could also just do a static mapping and say red if you wanted. So unlike ggplot, in this instance, everything kind of lives in one area. You don't have to have it mapped outside of these brackets. As long as it's referenced, as long as it's intuitive here. So here's correlation. You could plug in a static hex variable or just the color name as well. Here in plot text, I have a couple more examples to show how the mappings differentiate. And by the way, if you want to look at all of the different marks that are available, I think there's roughly like 30 of them today. A good resource to check out are the observable plot docs. They're pretty intuitive to like search and navigate through them. And each one is going to have like a list of all the different arguments that you can pass in. So for instance, with plot text, you're going to have X and Y, but it could include things like font size, font family, and then of course, like the text label of what you actually want to fill it with. This is going to look a little bit more complicated though than just our mapping to like a column within the data set. So here you're going to see the first instance of us using what's called arrow functions. And in this instance, what we're doing is we're saying, take this data variable and then do something additional to it. And if you're new to JavaScript, we use dot notation a lot to kind of get into the variables within an array. So if you're coming from the R background, you might use like D $ correlation. Here, what we're referring to is D dot correlation to get that, that variable from our array. This to fixed, this is just a JavaScript function to help us around it. So you're not seeing all of those decimals within the text. And I've included another arrow function below for the fill. And this fill, for me, it tripped me up the first time because for me, text would be like color or stroke color. But here it's accepting the fill argument to change the actual color of the text. And what we're passing in is an arrow function with if-then to change the color of the variable depending on what we're passing into this. So in this plot, for instance, with more negative variables, right? If we plot it with black text, it might not be as legible. So all we're doing here is picking like an absolute value point of 0.6 and saying, if anything, going back to this logic down here, if anything is greater than 0.6, make it white. Otherwise, use black font text for it. And we're using math.apps to get the absolute value for that correlation. So basic takeaways from this example, we're just looking at how you can layer marks. So in this case, we have plot.cell for your tile map, and you have plot.text. And then here's all of like the different styling tricks that you can use, including how to set up a legend here with color. Nice thing about the color schemes, they're coming directly from color brewers. So if you're familiar with like, you know, you could type in blues, you could type in, I also like the auto text pop-up because I don't remember all of the different arguments. So it's nice that it creates that on the go. But if you're using stuff like correlation matrices, I always recommend using diverging color palettes. So, okay, all right. So now we've kind of covered simply what observable plot looks like. You can layer marks, you can do some aesthetic tweaks with it. But what if we want to make this dynamic and interactive, right? Some people are like, well, you could probably use a lot of different libraries to create a similar plot. For me, one of the nice selling points is now I can make this interactive by creating observable inputs and passing them into observable plot. So an example of an input, if you click on that plus sign in a notebook and you start typing in inputs, it'll actually give you a list of inputs right off the bat. So you've got button inputs, toggle inputs. There's a lot more that you can explore. I have a list of them here. For this example, we're going to use a drop-down menu. So if you just click drop-down, it already pre-populates an example. So it's using inputs.select. If I render this, I can see now I've got a drop-down input. And I'm going to remove this for now. Another thing that's a little bit more advanced, but I prefer from an aesthetic standpoint, is also creating a form of inputs. So you can do this by using that inputs.form function and then setting up and mapping your different variables. So the way that you would call this then, I'm actually going to go back and, whoops, sorry about that. For instance, if I have a drop-down menu and I say test select, and let's say I call this now in a different JavaScript code block, right? I'm going to get A. But what happens when I start putting this into a form input? So I've called this form input filters. And within form filters, I have my select X variable set up and my select Y. So if I call in filters just like this, you're going to see it's going to return an object. So we're going to use that dot notation again to specify which variable I want with it. So here I'm going to say select X, and now it's going to return energy. And if I change this, you'll see it's changing within the notebook too. So now that we've gotten a preview of inputs, let's see how that works with observable plot. So in this one, here's just a basic scatter plot setup. Under the hood, what it's using is another mark called plot dot, and we're mapping it to our data frame songs, and then we're doing all of the bindings within. But instead of binding it to a variable within our data set, right, like energy or acousticness, what we're doing is we're actually passing in that JavaScript, that dynamic input that we've just created with filters. So here I'm binding it to filters.selectX, and with Y, filters.selectY. Most of the other tricks are, sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. So Are there themes like in ggplot, like more than just color schemes?
You can change the color schemes. I'm sure there's notebooks that have probably done some custom themes up front. But for stylings, most of that, from what I've seen, is just done kind of like on the go. Like I haven't seen, if the question is, are there out of the box themes? I haven't seen them, but that doesn't mean they don't exist. I'm sure someone probably has a notebook out there with them. Good question. For some really advanced stylings too, I always kind of lean on CSS for some stuff. But for the most part, you can do, there's a function here called style, or a property here called style. So if you wanted to set up, right, font family, I don't know what's available on my computer right now, but let's say, oh my God, dare I say Comic Sans. Oh, I guess I don't have Comic Sans available on my computer here. That's not a bad thing, but let's say Arial. It'll change the font for everything here. You could also change, I believe, color. So this, I think this does the majority of like what you would normally do with themes. But for super advanced stuff, I usually do CSS. And what I do is I like take a peek under the hood, typically in my browser with inspect, and I'll find the item that I want to customize and I'll customize it like that. I apologize if I like overwhelm people with my inspect browser tool, but it's actually really cool to see what happens under the hood because it's building it like you would with D3, and you can see all the different SVGs that it's creating as it's going through it. Cool. So a couple of other properties that you can use with plot dot. You can change the opacity here. To change the size, you're gonna use R, short for radius, to change the size of the dots. And another trick that we're applying here is with this title property mapping. So if you want to do like a quick hover effect, by the way, let me get rid of this ugly abrasive red color. So let's say I want to know which song is represented by this dot. What I could do to make this interactive is I could bind the track name to the title, and when I hover over it, it'll show up with the different track titles. There's also a lot more stuff that you can check out by adding tooltips. I've got some links in here, including somebody else's notebook, where they create a custom function that you can wrap observable plot with. There's more fun stuff coming out with interactive transformers like Pointer. And there's more, I've got a link to that as well too here. So much stuff I wanted to cover, but I'm trying to be mindful of time as I'm going through this. But if anybody has any questions after the workshop, please feel free to reach out to me. Okay, another cool trick, like with ggplot, I think one of the wow moments for me was being able to facet a plot to create multiple plots. Same thing with observable plot. There is a facet option that will let us facet either along the y-axis, the x-axis, or both. And the properties that we're going to use to do this, to map within those marks, are going to be fy if you're faceting on y, fx if you're faceting on x, or you can apply both. And I also want to show in this example that sometimes you can do the filtering directly in observable plot without having to subset the data beforehand, which is pretty cool. So here I have a faceted plot using our pivoted data. And this is going to look at distribution of values across different audio features. So here I've picked valence, energy, and danceability. Let's take a look under the hood of what that looks like. So similar setup. I've got my plot stylings up front here with height and width. Labels here is going to remove the labels from both the X and the Y axis. This X feature, if you want to change the scale of the X, the upper and lower limits, you can pass in a list with domain. So here I'm setting the lower limit to 0, upper to 1. And I'm also removing the tick marks with tick size 0. So like if I render this without that, you'll see that the ticks pop up on the axes. So here what's going on, plot.frame is another mark that just lets us create this outer box per plot. You can change the stroke of it, so it changes the outer box color. I've kept it to a very drab gray. And here we're using plot dot again. But in order to create this bee swarm effect, and this threw me for a loop as well, is that you can start like nesting marks together. So here, this dodge Y is going to help like offset it on the Y axis. But the important thing that I want to call out for this, without getting too much into like nested marks, is this idea of using a filter transform within the mark. So this filter transform, I'm using an arrow function here to say, take my data. By the way, this doesn't have to be D. It could be X, it could be I, it could be T. As long as you're being consistent throughout your function, it serves the same idea. It's just saying for each object in my array, I want you to do this with it. So here I am just filtering and saying I want only albums that are included in a list that I've called albums. So it's a nice trick to have up front if you don't want to do like data wrangling. There's an ability to do some of that transformation within Observable Plot too. And here is our friend facet. So here I'm using this facet Y, and I'm using a function. The only thing that I'm doing here with this arrow function is really doing like to uppercase, but to make it simple for today, what was my feature called? It was called feature. So I'm going to bind this to a variable called feature within the data set. Now it's just the lowercase version of it. So a really quick and easy way to do this. I'll send an example of a faceted plot that I did with the Supreme Court justices, which was really cool. But it saves a lot of time when you're able to pivot the data and do a lot of cool plots with it. These are some bonuses, but I don't want to make your head spin too much. I thought it was really cool to play around with tables. Unlike Observable Plot, a table is kind of treated more so like an input. So if you want to like get started with inputs, you could say like, oh, that's a markdown table. I suppose they don't have. I apologize. My navigating skills are not sharp today. But all this is another input. Technically, you could pass a record from this input somewhere else, but I just wanted to show if you wanted to use a table feature, you can do this with inputs.table. First thing that you're going to pass into it is the data frame. So this array filtered songs is what we're using just to show a list of all of Taylor Swift's songs. I've got the audio feature set up here, and there's more that you can explore. So here's an example of how you can format the table columns, the width, and do some cool HTML stylings if you're into some like HTML, CSS tricks. More of that in Mike Bostock's notebook, but not enough time to cover that today. I think the cooler thing for us to kind of take away from this too is the idea that you can work with a variety of different inputs. So we've already seen that inputs.select, which does that dropdown. Here's an example of how you can build range inputs to start working with different variables to start. Here it's subsetting it based on the minimum value, so you could see the values are changing. All right, this wouldn't be a data viz workshop with me if I didn't put something unconventional here. So here was just me trying to mess around with one of the marks in Observable Plot Rec to create a keyboard. So if you want to do something cool, don't feel limited. I've seen a lot of inspiring observable plots out there that do cool things. In this one, all I'm doing is building a keyboard and trying to show the distribution of Taylor Swift songs based on key. I guess the key of G seems to be really popular with her songs, or C, not so much with B. But here's an example, a more complex example of how you can start building things. So you can see I've got at least 1, 2, 3, 4 different marks where I'm building things together. A lot of arrow functions where I'm using if-thens to plot different variables. And kind of like theme void, I'm taking away like the tick marks right off the bat and taking away the labels on the axes. So I want to be mindful of time. I think now is kind of a good stopping point, but hopefully in this notebook, there's a lot of stuff to explore. What we've covered today is just the basics of what observable plot looks like, how you can layer with different marks, how you can leverage SQL to do some quick data wrangling, and the different inputs that you can use to make those observable plots super dynamic. So I'm going to stop here, open it up for Q&A. If you need a break, go stretch your legs. This would be the time to do it. And then in about 5 minutes, we're going to go right into a live example of how you can use observable plot in Quarto.
There's one question. Is observable HQ free? Is it possible to use when you have sensitive data or internal company data?
So there is a paid plan. That's a good question. If you want to share data and it's sensitive, I recommend checking out some of their different options. The free option, though, I believe the only thing you can do is like set it to, I don't know if there's a private version on the non-paid one, but definitely check it out. I can send more resources to show the different tierings and what you get. This is where I need like the observable salesperson on the line, right? Okay. All right, I still want to be mindful of time. So if there's no questions, feel free to take a break.
I think you deserve a break too, Tanya. I can start a timer real quick if you want to
Cool.
take a minute.
Sweet. All right, sounds good. Let's say meet back up at like 7:02. Does that work?
Sounds good.
Cool. Hello, hello. Awesome. So I hope folks are trickling back in. Give me a thumbs up if you're still alive and following. I think this part will be super quick. Love it. Cool. All right. In this section, we're going to stray away from Observable Notebook and we're going to go right into RStudio. It wouldn't be an R Ladies event without a little bit of R, right? So we're going to go ahead and open up. I'm going to go ahead and start screen sharing. Okay. By the way, all of even my Quarto files are available on that GitHub repo link that was sent out earlier. If you don't have the link, feel free to chat up one of the wonderful folks at Our Ladies or myself, and I'll be able to send it to you after. So if you're not familiar with Quarto, don't worry. I just want you to imagine the art of the possible here with me. So for some interactive data viz, at least for me coming from an R background, if I wanted to build something with a lot of different inputs and change my visualization, oftentimes like I would be building a Shiny app. And then I would have to worry about hosting that Shiny app somewhere on a server. And then we get into this whole other world of like DevOps and how do I maintain applications. I have a lot of love in my heart, by the way, for Shiny. I think what excites me about Observable is this idea that you can start building small app-like things without needing a server. And it can all be done right in Quarto. So recently Quarto released the pre-release 1.4, and it includes a format option to start creating dashboards. And I got really excited because I thought, wow, now I could start kind of dabbling and experimenting with Observable in a dashboard format and try to recreate maybe some of the stuff that I've done in Shiny. So here, all we're doing is taking the plots that we've seen in that Observable notebook for Taylor Swift songs, and we're going to be putting it into a Quarto file here and seeing how it works within OJS chunks. So OJS is observable JavaScript chunks. You can run vanilla JavaScript in there. You can run D3 in there. I use it a lot to start running my observable plot code as well, which is nice. I will say there's a little footnote to watch out for, is that sometimes the release versions can be a little bit different. So for instance, Observable has had a couple of new releases. So there's some features with an observable plot that might not work in Quarto. So definitely check that out and just kind of stay ahead as these features get released. So if you run into any errors, it might be because Quarto hasn't synced up yet with the latest release of Observable. So before we get into the code, I just want to show what this looks like right off the bat. So with this idea of Quarto dashboards, what it's doing is it's mimicking this format where I've got a sidebar panel. I really like in this new Quarto dashboard feature that there's also a lightbox thing where you can pop out visualizations. And if you go into that GitHub repository with GitHub pages, you could host it all there directly without needing a server. So see, now I'm changing my inputs, it's changing my plots. I even have a tab here that shows, oh, is this where technical difficulties kick in? Maybe. The table input, so you could see it's changing here. So it's really cool to see that you could host this with something as simple as GitHub pages using Quarto and using Observable. So a little sneak peek behind the hood of what that looks like. We won't go extensively through this line by line. A lot of it will look familiar based on what's already in the notebooks. But similar idea here is that you can set up different code chunks within your notebook. Here I've got OJS code chunks. Here's how you can load in data. Unlike observable code blocks, you can run a lot of things all in one code block. So I'm setting up different variables in one code block. Would definitely recommend, like if you're interested in Quarto dashboards, there's way more material coming out on how to use it. I've been still experimenting with it myself, so I'm by no means an expert on this, but it was a really cool use case application to go through. And here's an example, for instance, we're using the sliders and we're putting it right into an ODS block. It's creating slide input for us. I don't know if can you still hear me? It said my audio just shifted again. I'm so sorry about checking in on this. Okay, cool. Cool. So we've got sliders here that's showing up in my sidebar. I've got here some value box output. So these value boxes are not created with OJS, but rather it's an extension of that Quarto dashboard format. All I'm doing with OJS is plugging in the numbers for those value boxes. And here's that familiar plot.plot where I'm putting in a correlation matrix that we had from our notebook, and similar idea here with our scatter plot. So a lot to go through. Also an idea of how you could use DuckDB. There's an example, more resources available too in that GitHub repo of how you can use DuckDB to start querying data. Here's an example of that query. So it looks a little bit different. Instead of using SQL chunks, here in Quarto, you're using OJS and you're using that DuckDB client, passing in a query, and then it returns the results. And I'm still using, by the way, those dynamic JavaScript variables, which makes data wrangling so much easier in my opinion. Similar to observable notebooks, this doesn't have to read top down. So oftentimes I'll put like all of the gnarly functions that I use throughout my notebook somewhere else. So I've got a function at the bottom of my notebook and I'm using it at the top of it, it still works here because it's all active programming. And all of that can be, go ahead, sorry.
It's in the chat. Does the quote label, some label still work in OJS chunk like R chunk?
Sorry, can you, I don't know if I understood the question. Can you repeat the question one more time?
Does the hashtag label, some label still work in the OJS chunk like the R chunk?
Yes. So it's similar, but a little bit different. So instead of like commenting out, I think I'm following now. So it's like this kind of like YAML thing within the code. Instead of doing hashtags like you would with R, because hashtags used for commenting out, you're going to use that double slash here, and it will have the same effect here. So with OJS chunks, instead of using like hashtag in that bar to comment out, use that, and it's exactly this a similar effect here. Good question. And by the way, like I would say the majority of my projects on my Quarto site are using a mix of R and Quarto. I don't have an example in this dashboard of it, but for instance, there are use cases where you could technically get data from R, and then you could pass data from an R chunk to an OJS chunk with a function called OJS define. I'll make sure that's linked in the GitHub as well. So this is just a quick example use case of how you could make a dynamic dashboard using Observable Plot in Quarto. You can also see in my presentation deck that I put together in this example code for Reveal.js, I've also snuck an Observable Plot here. So here I'm reading in the CSV file. I'm setting up that select dropdown, and then I'm creating the plot here. So it's pretty cool being able to toggle between different languages. I'm a big believer that polyglot workflows is like the way of the future, and that's why I'm a big fan of any tools that are supporting it. So love a good mashup with R and Quarto. Definitely see a lot of use cases for it in the future, and I hope to see more Quarto and observable mashups in the future. So with that, I want to wrap it up and open it for any Q&A. Feel free to come off of mic. I think that's okay, right, Jesse? If they come off mute?
Yeah, I just made it so people could come off mute. Sorry.
Okay.
Thank you, Alex.
Sometimes when someone's presenting, we just avoid awkward moments where somebody's like accidentally unmuted. Hey, go ahead, Steffi.
Hi, thank you. I was just wondering, there's so many different libraries out there for like JavaScript based graphics. Why do you like Observable more than the others?
Good question. Honestly, I have not had a lot of time to explore all of the different options out there. I'm sure everybody has different preferences. I think what was appealing to me about Observable Plot, at least coming from a ggplot background, was this idea that it's based on the grammar of graphics in the sense that you can start layering different pieces together. And I just personally found it intuitive. And I like that notebook setup. A lot of times when I experiment with things, I like using the notebooks to like code or break things real time, and then use stuff like RStudio IDE to start creating these plots. Good question.
Cool, thank you.
I can't tell if I totally lost people in this workshop. I tried to I think maybe I covered too much stuff, but there's just so many things I wanted to share with y'all. So if you have any questions, it doesn't come to mind right now, you have them later, please feel free to reach out.
I have one that's more CSS related, but I feel like every time I start to get into CSS, I blink and the next thing I know, 3 hours are gone. Do you have any tips for just like how to be effective trying to get into CSS?
Wow. I relate to that a lot. I think it's also kind of similar to me with ggplot themes. Like you could spend hours trying to customize and tweak things. I do a lot of stuff in like the inspect tool, right? If I don't want to go back and like change things, I'll be like, what happens if I change this in the inspect tool in my browser to see it real time? But I cheat a lot. Like I'll use ChatGPT. I have no shame. I'll be like, how do I reference this div within this div to do this thing? And like 70% of the time it kind of gets me there. So it's a nice troubleshooting tool. But I've also used like basic things like W3. I'm a forever student when it comes to CSS too, so I feel that pain.
I was really hoping you'd have a good, cheat for me, but it seems like I just have to learn it like everything else.
Sorry about that.
Looks like there's another question in the chat. Jeremy, feel free to unmute if you'd like, or I can read the question. Okay. For the OGS define function, is that from an R package?
I believe that's native to Quarto. So I have never tried to call in a different package for it to work. If you have Quarto downloaded, it should work on its own. Don't quote me on that though, but I don't think I've ever used it with a library. And I'll definitely provide links for that too.
Tanya, this has been just absolutely amazing. I want to thank you for just getting so many resources together. I'm really excited to kind of like go back and go through it all and just start testing things out, trying things. I know it takes a lot of time and effort to put all of that documentation together, but I really appreciate all the effort you put into it. Thank you so much. If anybody does have questions, feel free to reach out to either the Our Ladies Philly group or to Tanya. What is the best way to get a hold of you? Are you Twitter still? Is that the best way to reach out?
I'm like
X.
all over the place these days. I've got some social links on my Quarto slides. Feel free to reach out to me on social media, email, LinkedIn. I'm kind of all over the place these days. I'm a social media nomad. Cool. Well, thank you all for having me. Jesse, it's been a pleasure working with you and Our Ladies. And thank you everyone who took time out of your day to join me. I really hope to see more of observable plots out there and hopefully more R and observable stuff. So happy experimenting.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.